The snow crunched beneath my boots as I stepped out of my car, the cold Alaskan wind slicing through the thick layers of my jacket. Before me stretched the ghostly remains of an abandoned village, rows of decaying cabins buried under thick snow, their wooden frames weathered, sagging under the weight of years of neglect. I had driven nearly 6 hours from the nearest town, taking narrow, icy roads through winding mountain passes just to reach this place. The idea was simple: document one of the most remote ghost villages in Alaska for my winter exploration vlog. My breath came out in heavy clouds as I scanned the area, camera in hand, the lens fogging with every exhale. The silence was overwhelming. No birds, no wind, no distant hum of civilization. Only the low groan of trees in the wind and the endless white stretching in all directions. It felt like the world had forgotten this place, and I was the only one foolish enough to remember it. I began filming right away, narrating into the camera as I moved slowly past the snow-covered structures. Each cabin told its own story: shattered windows, broken doors hanging off rusted hinges, and personal belongings left behind as if their owners had fled in a hurry. A faded sign creaked in the wind near what must have once been a general store, its lettering barely visible beneath the frost. I walked carefully, my boots sinking deep into the snowdrifts between buildings. The sky had begun to darken, the pale sun already dipping low on the horizon. That's when I noticed the wind changing. What had been a light breeze turned into sharp, stinging gusts that whipped at my face. I glanced back toward the path where my car sat partially hidden behind snow-covered trees, and that's when I saw it. The wall of white approaching fast from the mountains. A blizzard. And it was coming straight for me. I didn't waste a second. Turning off the camera, I stumbled through the deepening snow toward the nearest cabin, my fingers already numb as I reached for the door. It gave way with a groan, revealing a dark, empty interior that smelled of rot and dust. I slammed it shut behind me just as the blizzard hit, the wind howling like a beast outside. Snow began piling against the doorframe within minutes, and the temperature dropped sharply. I fumbled around with the weak light from my phone, illuminating cracked floorboards, broken furniture, and a wood stove long gone cold. Huddled in a corner, I wrapped my arms around myself, waiting for the storm to pass. The wind screamed outside, shaking the walls of the cabin, but inside was only silence, and the uneasy sense that the village wasn't as empty as it seemed. Hours passed before the wind began to die down. The thick flurries against the windows thinned to scattered flakes, and pale daylight seeped back through the cracks in the wood. I slowly opened the door, bracing against the cold, and stepped back into the snow-covered village. Everything looked different. Deeper, softer, muted beneath a fresh layer of white. I pulled out my camera again, hoping to capture the eerie calm after the storm. As I narrated about being trapped during the blizzard, I paused mid-sentence. There it was, something faint, a sound carried on the wind, a crunch, a drag. I turned sharply, scanning the rows of cabins. Nothing. The village was supposed to be abandoned. No one had lived here in decades. But that sound, it hadn't come from me. Through a crack in the boarded-up window, I finally saw it. A massive white shape lumbering between the cabins, its form nearly blending into the snow, except for the slow, deliberate movement and the dark eyes that glinted beneath the overcast sky. My breath caught in my throat. It was a polar bear, at least 8 feet tall at the shoulder, its fur matted with ice, steam rising off its back like mist. But something about the way it moved chilled me deeper than the cold ever could. It wasn't aimless, it wasn't foraging, it was tracking, hunting. It passed directly in front of the store, stopping suddenly. Its head lifted, sniffed, turned, and then it moved toward the entrance. My body locked up as I crouched behind the counter, heart thundering. The bear pressed against the door with a deep thud, the old wood creaking loudly beneath its weight. Its claws scraped at the frame, slow, rhythmic, like it was testing how long the barrier would last. The whole front wall groaned, but by some miracle, the door held. The bear didn't growl, didn't roar. It simply waited, sniffing, scraping, as if it knew exactly where I was, and was trying to decide how to get in. I didn't dare move. Every second stretched unbearably long as the bear remained outside, circling the store, its massive body brushing against the wooden siding. At one point, I thought it was leaving, until the back wall shuddered with a heavy impact, dust falling from the ceiling as the creature tested another way in. I knew the store wouldn't hold forever. I had to move. Quietly, I slipped toward the rear, stepping over broken glass and rusted cans, careful not to make a sound. I found a back door, warped but not locked. I pushed it open just enough to slide through, wincing as the hinges groaned. Outside, the air was still, the snow untouched. I sprinted for the nearest alley between two collapsed cabins, slipping once, catching myself on the frozen ground. Behind me, I heard it, the unmistakable crunch of snow under heavy feet, growing faster. It had heard me. It was coming. I ran without a plan, weaving through narrow paths between half-buried buildings, past rusted sleds and leaning power poles frozen in time. The polar bear was gaining on me, its massive form crashing through snowdrifts with terrifying speed. I could hear the thudding of its heavy paws, each step closer, closer. My breath came in ragged gasps, lungs burning with the frigid air, my legs numb from cold, and the weight of terror that seemed to press down harder with every step. I veered off the path, desperate to put distance between us, and plunged into the edge of the forest that bordered the village. The trees were skeletal, their branches clawing at my face, and the snow beneath me was deep, pulling at my legs with each step. The bear was close, its breath ragged in the cold air, growing louder with every second. I couldn't let it catch me. I ducked under fallen trees, scrambled over ice-covered mounds, and pushed through the biting wind. The village, the danger, it all seemed to fade into the white blur around me. But ahead, just ahead, was my car. The faint outline of it nestled near the edge of the forest, the key still in my pocket, I hoped. I had to reach it. I had to. Just a few more seconds. My heart pounded in my chest as I pushed harder, the forest thickening around me, the ground slippery with ice and snow. The roar of the bear behind me was unmistakable now. Close, too close, its breath heavy in the cold air, punctuated by the terrifying crack of trees snapping as it tore through the woods. I stumbled, falling once, then scrambling to my feet, barely catching myself before the snow could swallow me whole. Every step felt like it took an eternity, my legs heavy with exhaustion, my mind screaming at me to keep moving, to make it to the car. Finally, the trees began to thin, and I saw it, a flash of metal through the branches. My white-knuckled grip tightened around the key in my pocket as I pushed through the last of the brush and broke into the clearing. There it was, my car, the headlights flickering faintly in the dim light, waiting for me. I ran, stumbling toward it, fumbling with the door, throwing myself inside. The bear's growl echoed in the distance, a chilling reminder of how close it had come, but I slammed the door shut, heart racing, and started the engine. The engine roared to life, and I hit the gas, tires spinning in the snow as I tore away from the abandoned village, my car sliding across the frozen ground, the bear's growls fading into the storm behind me. I didn't look back as I sped down the icy road, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The storm raged around me, but I felt like I had escaped something far worse than the blizzard. The village, the bear, everything that had happened seemed like a nightmare that would fade with distance. But deep down, I knew better. I could still hear the sounds, the crunch of snow, the growl, the feeling of its eyes locked on me even as I left it behind. I pushed the accelerator harder, the headlights cutting through the thick snow ahead, but all I could think of was how close I had come to becoming another forgotten soul in that abandoned place. It was supposed to be an adventure, a vlog, but now it was something else entirely. Something I would never be able to explain. And as the village slowly disappeared in my rearview mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't truly escaped. Not completely. Something had followed me, and it wasn't finished yet. Claire Jensen stepped off the snowmobile and onto the icy grounds of the remote mountain research station, the wind biting at her face. The station was nestled deep in the Alaskan wilderness, isolated from the world by towering peaks and an endless sea of snow. The isolation was both a draw and a curse. She'd come here to study the glaciers, to gather data, but the eerie silence and the desolate surroundings weighed heavily on her. The last team had left weeks ago, leaving the station in her care, with only the occasional radio check-in to break the monotony. The buildings were old, their paint peeling and windows frosted over, but they were sturdy enough to withstand the harsh elements. Claire wiped the frost from her goggles, adjusted her backpack, and moved toward the main building, unaware that something else had been waiting in the shadows for her arrival. Inside the research station, the air was thick with dust and the remnants of old equipment, abandoned in a hurry. Claire's footsteps echoed through the empty hallways as she made her way to the control room. The station had been built decades ago, and despite the modern technology she'd brought with her, the walls still felt as though they carried the weight of years of isolation. She shivered as a cold draft swept through the hallway, but she was used to it. The station had a way of feeling alive, even though she was its only occupant. She powered up the computers, checked the satellite feed, and confirmed that everything was working, at least on the surface. But something felt off. A gnawing sensation in the pit of her stomach, a feeling of being watched, lingered. She shook her head and blamed it on the isolation. It had been a while since she'd had a proper conversation with someone. As Claire unpacked her gear, she noticed something strange, a small, weathered journal left on the desk in the corner of the control room. It wasn't hers. She opened it cautiously, flipping through pages filled with strange symbols and hastily written notes in a shaky hand. One entry stood out. The last team sealed themselves in. It's the only way to stay safe. Claire frowned, her heart pounding a little faster. She didn't know much about the previous team, but she had been told they'd left for the winter. There was no mention of why they had left or what had happened to them. A cold shiver ran down her spine as she closed the journal, the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. She told herself it was just the isolation playing tricks on her mind. But the journal seemed like an eerie message from the past, one she couldn't ignore. Claire couldn't shake the unease that had settled over her, so she decided to check the rest of the station. She made her way to the living quarters, opening doors that had not been touched in years. The rooms were a mess, their once comfortable furnishings covered in dust and grime. Yet, as she moved from one room to the next, she noticed a disturbing pattern. Some of the beds were still made, and there were traces of food left on the counters, as if the people who had lived here had abruptly stopped everything. The cold seemed to penetrate deeper with every step, and Claire's breath quickened, though she couldn't tell if it was from fear or the creeping chill. She opened the last door, and there it was, another journal, this one lying on the floor near a half-open wardrobe. She bent down, her fingers trembling as she reached for it. The handwriting was familiar. It was the same as the one she had found in the control room. And this entry was different. We're not alone here. They've been watching us. Her eyes widened, her mind racing as she scanned the page. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Claire's heart thudded in her chest as she stood frozen in the doorway, the journal heavy in her hands. The words on the page felt like a warning, a cryptic message left behind by the previous team, one that she wasn't sure how to interpret. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and she quickly placed the journal back where she found it, her mind reeling. She had to focus. There was work to be done. She reminded herself that it was just the isolation getting to her, that her nerves were getting the best of her. But as she made her way back down the hall toward the main area, the air seemed to grow colder, heavier. The faint sounds of the wind howling outside were now replaced with something else, a soft scraping noise, distant but unmistakable. Claire stopped in her tracks, straining her ears. Her breath caught in her throat as the sound grew louder, like something was moving just out of sight, something large and deliberate. The scraping noise stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Claire stood motionless, her eyes darting around the dimly lit hallway. Her mind raced, but no logical explanation surfaced. She couldn't shake the sensation that she wasn't alone. The sense of being watched crept over her like a dark cloud. She glanced toward the windows. The snowstorm outside had worsened, and the storm had begun to bury the station under a thick layer of snow. The power flickered, and the lights dimmed momentarily, plunging her into brief darkness. When the lights returned, everything seemed unchanged, but Claire knew better. Something had shifted. The oppressive atmosphere in the station had deepened. She was no longer sure whether she was imagining things or if someone, or something, was really out there. With a deep breath, she decided to investigate further, stepping toward the door that led to the equipment room. The moment she touched the handle, a loud bang echoed through the station. Her pulse raced as she spun around, her eyes scanning the empty hall. But there was nothing. Nothing but the bitter chill of the winter air creeping in from the cracks. Claire's heart pounded in her chest as she backed away from the door, her mind swirling with uncertainty. She told herself it was just the wind, the building settling under the weight of the snow. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. The air inside the station felt too still, too thick with tension. With a shaky hand, she grabbed her flashlight and moved toward the stairs that led to the upper floor. The boards creaked under her feet as she ascended, the sound echoing unnervingly through the station. At the top of the stairs, Claire hesitated. The narrow hallway stretched before her, its shadows deep and foreboding. She could hear the faintest rustle like something, or someone, was moving up there. She took a deep breath, mustered what little courage she had left, and stepped forward. The flashlight beam swept over the walls, revealing the same cold, sterile space as before. But when it landed on the end of the hall, Claire's stomach twisted. There, half hidden in the shadows, was the silhouette of a figure, just standing there, watching her. For a moment, Claire couldn't move. The figure at the end of the hall remained eerily still, its features obscured in the dim light. Was it one of the previous research team members? Could it be someone who had been hiding, waiting for the storm to pass? Or was it something else entirely, something that didn't belong? Her breath hitched as the figure took a slow step forward. A sharp, guttural sound filled the air, a sound too low to be human, almost animalistic. Claire's instincts screamed at her to run, but her body betrayed her, rooted to the spot in a mixture of fear and curiosity. The figure took another step, then another. With a burst of adrenaline, Claire bolted for the stairs, her feet pounding against the floor, the flashlight trembling in her grasp. The figure did not chase her, but Claire didn't stop to look back. She reached the stairs in seconds, her breath ragged as she descended, trying to control the panic rising in her chest. When she reached the bottom, the silence returned, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the quiet before the storm, the kind of silence that made her feel like she was being hunted. Claire's mind raced as she stumbled back into the main room of the research station, trying to block out the image of the shadowy figure she had seen upstairs. The door was still sealed tight, the lock holding strong, but it offered little comfort. She had no idea who, or what, was up there, and no way of knowing if it was still watching her. The tension in the air was unbearable. She scanned the room, desperate for any sign of safety or a way to escape, but everything was just as she had left it, except for the subtle, unsettling shift in the atmosphere. Her eyes fell on the old radio in the corner, its dials cracked and worn, but it still looked functional. Hesitant, Claire walked over to it, brushing the dust away. She turned the dial slowly, the static crackling louder with each movement. Finally, a voice broke through, faint and distorted at first, but slowly growing clearer. "You're not alone." The message sent a chill down Claire's spine, her blood running cold. She snapped her head around to look behind her, expecting to see the figure standing in the doorway. But there was nothing. The silence returned, even heavier than before. A wave of cold dread washed over Claire as she turned the radio off. Her fingers trembled as they gripped the worn metal of the dial. She had to leave. She couldn't stay here any longer. But the storm outside had only gotten worse, and she had no idea if she could make it back to the town through the blizzard. She needed to think clearly. Claire quickly gathered her things, her coat, the flashlight, and anything she could carry, and made her way to the back exit. The wind howled outside, the blizzard still raging, but at least she was outside the station now. The moonlight struggled to break through the thick clouds, casting the snow-covered ground in an eerie glow. She moved quickly, her heart pounding as she made her way down the narrow path. But as she reached the edge of the station's perimeter, Claire froze. There, standing just beyond the fence, was the figure again. This time it was closer. Its shape was clearer, and Claire's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the silhouette. A man, tall and slender, with dark eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. He stepped forward, his mouth barely moving as he whispered, "I was waiting for you." Before Claire could react, she turned and ran, her feet sinking into the snow as she sprinted toward the safety of the woods, the figure's chilling words echoing in her mind. The storm had intensified, but Claire's only focus was escaping. She had to survive.